The twin sisters who shared one slave, and both ended up pregnant. There's a photograph that survives in a private collection in Louisiana. It was never meant to be seen. Two women in identical white dresses, standing on either side of a young black man. Their hands rest on his shoulders. They're smiling. He is not. On the back, in faded ink, someone wrote three words: our shared secret. For over a century, descendants tried to burn every copy. They failed. What you're about to hear is the story that photograph tried to hide. A story of two sisters, one enslaved man, and a family tree that twisted into something no one wanted to claim. This isn't mythology. This isn't folklore. This happened, and someone in America right now carries this blood and doesn't know it. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The Beaumont twins were born in 1834 on a sugar plantation outside Baton Rouge. Identical in every way. Pale eyes, copper hair, the kind of beauty that made men forget their manners. Their father, Claude Beaumont, owned 200 souls. Their mother taught them French and piano. By age 16, they'd been courted by every eligible bachelor within 50 miles. But the sisters had a secret language, a way of finishing each other's sentences that unnerved even their own parents. They shared everything: dresses, jewelry, dreams, and then, in the summer of 1852, they began sharing something else. His name was Samuel. He was 18 years old. He'd been born on the property, and he was legally property himself. The twins had watched him grow up, watched him become strong, watched him move through the fields with a kind of grace that made them both go quiet. Neither sister spoke of it at first, but they didn't have to. They always knew what the other was thinking. One night, after a house party, the sisters dismissed the other servants early. Samuel was ordered to stay. What began that night would become a routine, and within 6 months, both women had stopped appearing at Sunday services. By autumn, the rumors started. By winter, the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. The Beaumont twins were both pregnant, and everyone knew who the father was. Claude Beaumont was a man who valued reputation above all else. His family name had opened doors across the South. His daughters were supposed to marry into wealth, produce legitimate heirs, and preserve the bloodline. Instead, they had committed what he considered an unforgivable betrayal, not because they had relations with an enslaved man. That happened often enough, quietly, in the dark, but because they had done it together, openly, without shame. The scandal didn't stay contained. Servants whispered. Neighboring plantation owners heard. Letters were written. Invitations were quietly rescinded. Claude's wife took to her bed and didn't emerge for weeks. The family doctor was summoned and sworn to secrecy, but secrets like this don't stay buried. They fester, they grow. Claude had 3 choices. He could send his daughters away to have the children in secret and give them up. He could marry them off quickly to men who didn't know, didn't care, or needed money badly enough to overlook it. Or he could do what many men in his position did, erase the problem entirely, but his daughters refused to cooperate. They refused to name anyone else as the father. They refused to feel ashamed, and they absolutely refused to be separated. They told their father, calmly and without emotion, that they would have these children, that they would raise them together, and that if he tried to stop them, they would tell everyone in Baton Rouge exactly what kind of man he really was. They had kept journals, they had letters, and they knew things about their father's business dealings that could ruin him. Claude Beaumont realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he had completely lost control. His daughters had become something he didn't recognize, and Samuel, the young man at the center of it all, had not spoken a single word. Samuel's silence was not submission. It was survival. He understood the situation better than anyone. He was 18 years old and had been used by two white women who held absolute power over his life. There was no scenario where he came out of this safely. If he resisted, he'd be killed. If he complied, he'd be killed. If he ran, he'd be hunted down and killed. His only option was to stay quiet, keep his head down, and hope that whatever decision the Beaumont family made, it wouldn't end with a noose. But something strange happened. The twins protected him. When their father suggested selling Samuel to a plantation in Mississippi, both sisters threatened to go with him. When a group of local men came to the estate, drunk and angry, talking about making an example, the twins stood on the porch with loaded rifles and told them to leave. No one knew what to make of it. This wasn't the usual arrangement of master and slave. This was something else, something possessive, something twisted, something that didn't fit into the social order everyone understood. The twins treated Samuel like he belonged to them, and only them. They moved him into a room in the main house, they had meals brought to him, they dressed him in clothes that made him look less like a field hand and more like a house servant of status. To the outside world it looked insane. But inside the Beaumont estate, a new hierarchy had formed. The twins had declared their territory, and Samuel was at the center of it. He didn't love them, he couldn't, but he played the role they demanded because the alternative was death. And as the months passed and their bellies grew, the entire parish held its breath, waiting to see what would happen when the children were born. The births happened within 2 days of each other in March of 1853. The first twin, whose name was Marguerite, delivered a girl. She had Samuel's dark eyes and her mother's pale skin, a child who could pass if raised carefully. The second twin, Celeste, delivered a boy. He was darker. There would be no hiding what he was. The midwife who attended both births was paid a staggering sum to never speak of it, but she told her daughter, who told her son, who eventually told a journalist in 1920. That's how we know what happened in that room. Marguerite looked at her daughter and smiled. Celeste looked at her son and wept, not because she didn't want him, but because she knew what the world would do to him. Claude Beaumont came into the room after the second birth, looked at both children, and walked out without saying a word. He locked himself in his study for 3 days. When he finally emerged, he had made his decision. The girl would be raised as a Beaumont, the boy would not. Samuel was given a choice, though it wasn't really a choice at all. He could stay on the plantation and watch his son be raised as a slave, or he could leave with the boy and never come back. If he stayed, he'd be sold within the year. If he left, he'd be a fugitive, but the twins had arranged for papers, forged documents that said he'd been freed. It wasn't legal, but it was something. Samuel took his son and disappeared into the night. Marguerite kept her daughter, Celeste never forgave her sister, and the Beaumont family fractured in a way that could never be repaired. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? The girl, named Isabelle, grew up believing she was the legitimate child of a cousin who had died in childbirth. Marguerite never married. She raised Isabelle alone, in a wing of the Beaumont estate that became more and more isolated as the years went on. The Civil War came and went. The plantation was burned during Reconstruction. Claude Beaumont died in 1867, bitter and broken. His wife followed 6 months later. Celeste, the twin who had lost her son, became a recluse. She spent her days writing letters, hundreds of them, trying to find out what had happened to Samuel and the boy. She never got an answer. In 1871, she walked into the bayou and didn't come back. They found her body 3 weeks later. Some said it was an accident. Others said she'd been looking for a way out since the day her son was taken. Marguerite lived until 1899. In her final years, she told Isabelle the truth. Isabelle, by then a woman in her 40s with children of her own, was horrified. She burned her mother's journals, destroyed every photograph she could find, and forbade her children from ever speaking of it. But one photograph survived, the one with the two sisters and Samuel, taken in the summer of 1052, before everything fell apart. It was hidden in a trunk, passed down through generations, until a descendant found it in 2003 and didn't know what to do with it. That's when the story started to come out. DNA tests confirmed what the family had tried to erase. Isabel's descendants carried Samuel's genes. So did a black family in Ohio who had traced their lineage back to a man named Samuel and his son, who had fled Louisiana in 1053. The Beaumont estate no longer exists. The land was sold off in pieces. The main house collapsed in the 1950s, but the story didn't die. It lives in the DNA of two families who didn't know they were connected. It lives in the archives of a small historical society in Baton Rouge, where a researcher found a birth record that didn't make sense until someone explained what had really happened. It lives in the minds of people who heard the rumor, dismissed it as too strange to be true, and then saw the evidence. This is what slavery did. It didn't just steal labor. It didn't just destroy lives. It twisted human relationships into shapes that shouldn't exist, where love and violence became indistinguishable, where children were born into a world that didn't know what to call them, where a young man named Samuel had to choose between watching his son grow up in chains or becoming a fugitive in a country that wanted him dead. The Beaumont twins believed they loved him. Maybe they did in their own broken way, but love without power is just another word for control, and Samuel never had power. Not once. The children born from that arrangement carried a secret in their blood that some of them still don't know. And somewhere in America right now, someone is looking at a family tree, seeing a gap they can't explain, and wondering why no one ever talks about what happened in 1853. Now you know, now you carry this story too, and like everyone who came before you, you have to decide what to do with it. Some stories don't have endings, they just keep unfolding generation after generation until someone finally has the courage to say it out loud. This is one of those stories, and it's not over yet.